of my favorite things to do after graduating was to pick up all of my stuff and head west to Estes Park, Colorado, deep into the Rocky Mountains. I would always go to some of my favorite spots like Dream Lake between Flat Top Mountain and Hallett Peak. But a few times I would just keep driving further in, further up. I would keep going until basically the road met the sky and there was no more upward to be had. If you've never been, it's a little bit hard to describe. The snow is a wild sight, especially in summer when you've left ground level and you've made your way up into the mountains and you're experiencing the summer heat, and all of a sudden you feel this fresh, cool air. The sky, it seems bigger up there. You're surrounded by mega cliffs that at the same time, from a distance, look so small and far away. The heights are dizzying. The sun is louder up there. In fact, it's a strange sensation because the air is so cool, but it feels like with the directness of the sun, it's like your skin could burn really easily. And the air is brighter up there. It's like entering a different world. I can't say that I always went up there with a spiritual purpose, but often going up into the mountains felt spiritual in a way. And that was no different on one particular day, a long time ago, when I was coming down from those mountains, leaving the majestic purple mountains and driving into the dry, brown, arid landscape of eastern Colorado. I was coming down, going on a mission to ask forgiveness. Well, if this is your first time with us this week, we have been going through a series on the Lord's Prayer that we call Pray Like This. And over the past several weeks, we have taken this beautiful prayer and we have dug in piece by piece to weigh its value and to pray its value. We have discovered a God who is both in control of the universe and who holds us in the palm of his hands. We have also discovered a kingdom that is good and perfect and true, but comes in mysterious ways. We have discovered that our needs are something that God cares about and invites us to pray for daily. Well, it turns out that there are some things in our life, there are a few things that we carry that we would also probably like God to take away too. Like silence. Like silence. It's that feeling that we have when we feel like God just doesn't hear us. Or distance. When we show up to church, when we read our Bibles, but it just doesn't feel like God is there. Or self-punishment. If I feel bad enough, long enough, I'll deserve forgiveness. Or perhaps a spiritual resume. If I work hard enough, it'll outweigh the things that I'm ashamed of. Or regret. Regret that can sometimes feel like a backpack that we just can't take off. And maybe the hardest part is not believing, is believing God. Not believing in God, but believing God. Believing that he has mercy for us, that grace is available after we mess up again and again. Well, what we're going to talk about today, it's important. And although many of us are comfortable with the idea of a forgiving God, sometimes it's hard for us to believe that God could be forgiving towards us. And this is what's at stake. If we don't understand God's forgiveness, we will stay bound to shame, we'll stay bound to guilt, and we'll just live under a weight. When we can't understand God's forgiveness, it's more difficult to be vulnerable. And it shrinks our capacity to love other people because of that. But if we know forgiveness, if we truly know God's amazing forgiveness, that, my friends, is freedom. So, how do we become the kind of people that don't have to carry the baggage of yesterday's mistakes? The answer comes in the Lord's Prayer with a surprising twist. But before we go there, let's set the stage again for the Lord's Prayer. Now, as we mentioned a few weeks ago, the Lord's Prayer is found in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, right in the heart of the Sermon on the Mount. Not long after a climactic moment where Jesus says, "Be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect." Now, we, reading that from a Western mindset, often think about the checklists. Get 100% on the quiz. Don't mess up at work. But Jesus is talking about something a shade different. He's talking about being whole, being complete, being undivided, especially undivided in heart. Undivided in heart. Do you know what it means or what it looks like to be undivided in heart? Well, Jesus tells us in the next 3 sections that follow. To fast, to give, and to pray without having ulterior motives. Those who have ulterior motives, he has a name for that. That's hypocrisy. People who fast and pray and give so that they can get attention from others, so that people could look at them and say, "Nice job, way to go." Jesus' point is that we should do these for the glory of the Father. So he encourages people to do them in secret so that we can have right motives, and then so that our hearts may be whole instead of divided. And then Jesus teaches about praying specifically, and that's where we encounter this wonderful prayer. He says praying should be sincere, and it should be simple, trusting that God will provide. And although it is beautiful, we talked a few weeks ago, it has internal rhyme, it has slant rhyme in the original language. It's also very simple. It's short and memorable, and it keeps our minds on the right things. It helps us to focus. But a piece of this prayer today comes with a bit of a surprising twist, and also a promise. We need to ask for something, but that's where the twist comes from. It also comes with a promise, not from God to us, but from us to God. And that might be one of the most challenging promises in the entire Bible. Well, we'll get there in a minute, but let's read the Lord's Prayer. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Yes, we could say it together. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Does that bit about forgiving debts stand out to you too? If you have a credit card, if you have credit card debt, if you have a student loan, if you have a mortgage that you're paying off, the thought of debt forgiveness, that's a really good thing, isn't it? The most common word for forgiveness, actually, in the New Testament is not a word that's used here. The word here is aphiemi in the original language, and it's more traditionally rendered as leave or release. And that captures a really important feeling in this text. Release us from our debts. Release us from our debts. Debts are things that pin us down. When you imagine your future, like maybe a dream vacation or going back to school or going to school for the first time or retirement, debt snatches you, holds you back. But Jesus is not really talking about financial debt here, is he? He's talking about wrongdoing. There's a couple of reasons that he probably uses this expression, release and debt, instead. First, it's just practical. Remember, this prayer has poetry all over it. And the beginning rhyme, and there's beginning rhyme in this verse. The word for debts is aphalema, aphalema. And the word for release is ophimi, ophimi. And you can see that that first sound is the same in both words. So again, for practical reasons, the words are being put together so that they're memorable, so that they sing, so that people can enjoy the beauty even in the midst of the simplicity. So that's one reason that those words are probably used here. But that metaphor is also, it's really strong, isn't it? When we break trust, when we're disloyal, we put ourselves in a debt-like position against God. Now let's get this right, because this metaphor can be stretched to probably a little bit too far. Jesus is not saying that forgiveness or wrongdoing is an accounting problem. Can you imagine speaking badly about somebody and then to make things right, pulling out your wallet and handing them a $20 bill? Now, we kind of do that with our legal system, but our legal system recognizes that there's no perfect way to settle those kind of debts. You can't quantify injury. You can't put a price tag on relational wrongs. It just doesn't work that way. Even Matthew, who was a tax collector, knew this. He was a middleman between the oppressive Roman government and the Jewish people, and he was taking taxes, often too much taxes from them for his own personal gain, as was the reputation of tax collectors in those days. When Matthew was at a party, he wasn't the first person that people were going to. In fact, Matthew wasn't even invited to these parties. Because when you have a debt, even a financial debt with somebody, that brings us into a relationship that invokes shame and guilt. It's hard to have healthy relationships, even when the debt is quite reasonable with these people. Whenever we wrong somebody, and that wrong goes unaddressed, it creates an invisible barrier that is more physical than a wall. I remember being hurt by somebody in high school, and in response to that, I said some things that were really hurtful, and that caused the relationship to split and go in different ways. A few years later, we kind of found ourselves into the same space, and we behaved amicably with one another, but it was still there. It was unaddressed, it was felt, it was awkward, it wasn't right, even after years had gone by. Friends, could this be the same thing? Could this kind of thing happen also with our relationship with God? Maybe it's something that you haven't brought to God. Maybe it's something that you haven't verbalized to him. Maybe it's something unforgiven that keeps you from walking freely and living a spirit-filled life. Release our debts. Release our debts. That's where these powerful words come into play from Jesus in the Lord's Prayer. Release our debts. He teaches us to honor the Father. He teaches us to pray for and anticipate the kingdom. He teaches us to pray for our daily needs. And then he teaches us to pray that something would be taken away. Release our debts so that we can truly live. Forgiveness is something that cannot be seen. There's no color to it. There's no width to it. There's no height that can be perceived, but it can be felt. And there is nothing quite like the feeling of being made clean. But Jesus doesn't stop there, does he? After a simple ask, he rocks his disciples by, I'm going to call it a violent twist in the prayer, if I can do that, as we also have forgiven our debtors. Even Jesus recognized the seismic shift of this addition to the prayer. And we know that because after the prayer, which the prayer thematically is about the simplicity and the sincerity of praying, he puts something on the end to address the controversy that he just raised. In verses 14 and 15, he says this, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins." There's such a strong relationship between our forgiveness and our forgiving that Jesus teaches to pray in such a way that forgiving activity is presumed even before we ask God to forgive us. It's not, "and we will forgive." It's not, "and we'll try to forgive." It's not even, "and enable us to forgive." It's, "as we forgive." As we forgive. And I don't know about you, but that feels pretty impossible to me. And not only does it feel impossible to me, it also, frankly, it feels kind of strange. If you've been raised in the church, if you've been reading the Bible for some time, perhaps it kind of rubs you wrong against some of the other things that you've learned about the forgiveness and about the grace of God. And it leaves you with this idea of a very strange condition. One of the practical parenting techniques that Amy and I have tried to deploy over the years is something called when-then statements. When-then. When you clean up your room, you can watch a show. When you eat your supper, then you can have dessert. And side note, it's really all about the tone. But something strange started happening. They started to pick up on our language. Let's see, how do they say it? When you let me watch a show, I'll eat my vegetables. Wait, what? This is backwards. And what we're seeing here, that kind of feels backwards too. When you forgive other people, then I'll forgive you. When you forgive other people, then I'll forgive you. Is God really like that? Well, we have talked at length about grace here at Christ Church of Amherst. And one of the surprising things about grace, some people think there isn't grace in the Old Testament and it's only in the New. And all the more reason we might think that as we think about and reflect on the events of Holy Week and the grace of God spilling out to mankind. But the truth is, in the Old Testament, God is patient, God is kind, God is forgiving. But one of the expressions that you are never going to find in the Old Testament is this. Maybe it's an expression you're familiar with, and it comes out of Romans chapter 5, verse 8. Just a few words, "while we were yet sinners." And these are some of the most important words in the Bible. We've talked about this before, but just my encouragement to you, these might be words you will want to remember, especially on a hard day. So if you're not against it, let's just say this together. While we were yet sinners. While we were yet sinners. While we were yet sinners, what? While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And the Apostle Paul tells us that this is how God demonstrated his love to us while we were yet sinners. Not after. Not after. Not after beating a bad habit, not after overcoming bad thoughts, not after, while. In the midst of our worst selves, God gives his only Son to pay for our sins and demonstrate that his love is without limits in the midst of our worst selves. So why would Jesus tell disciples God's forgiveness is limited by our forgiveness? Well, in Matthew chapter 18, the disciple at the time, Peter, is brazen enough to ask a question that's on everybody's mind, but everybody else is too afraid to ask. And he asks this: how many times should I forgive somebody who has sinned against me? 6? 7? And Jesus, as he does, he answers with a parable. And he tells a parable of a rich king and a man who was in debt to that king. This is how much Jesus says that man owed the king. And we'll come back to this in just a minute. He owed him 10,000 talents of gold. 10,000 talents of gold. A talent is a weight. Well, the king shows great mercy on this man, and he releases him from his debt. And then the man in Matthew 18, he goes off, and it turns out we discover that this man also has people who are in debt to him. In particular, there's one man who owes him 100 silver coins. 100 silver coins. That's no small amount of money. And he demands that the man return the silver coins to him, and he doesn't. So what the man does is he has his debtor thrown into prison. Well, let's put some modern perspective on this. 100 silver coins today would be about $4,350. That's no small change, right? That's a few months' wages, depending on where you live, or a good month's wage. How much is the 10,000 golden bags? $28.2 billion in today's money. In the story, when the king finds out about this, he reverses course, and this is what he says in Matthew 18:33. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? Even though Matthew, being a tax collector, loves money analogies, this proves that that Jesus' thoughts and his ideas here are not about a transaction. In fact, if we thought that way, it would be dangerous. If we think about what we get only, it shows that we show ourselves not to have weighed how much we have been forgiven. And in fact, we may not have received it in the first place. The only limit to forgiveness is us. Now, this analogy might be a little bit crude, but hang in there with me for a little bit. Let's consider the things that maybe we need to ask God forgiveness for. And maybe it's something like this: impatience. Maybe your kids are too slow to obey, or your spouse is always late, or your coworkers have unfair expectations. Impatience. Or perhaps it's something like this guy here. Dishonesty. It's the little ways that we lie at work, we exaggerate on social media, or perhaps some of the truths that we withhold. It's another weight, another thing that we might need to ask forgiveness for. How about selfishness? Maybe you find yourself putting yourself before your spouse, your family, or your neighbors, your comfort before them. An awful lot, and maybe more than you would like to admit. What would it be like to be free from that? Not just free from that, but free from free from the feeling and the burden that we carry around for something like this: selfishness. Oh, these are getting heavy. Judgmentalness. I know we don't like to think this. I know we all like to think that we're not judgmental people, but sometimes if we encounter somebody maybe from a lower class, a different way of thinking, the thoughts that come into our minds aren't always the best. I'll be the first to own up on that one. Judgmentalness. All right, we got some different colored ones. These are red. What about the things that we hold against other people? This one's a heavy one. I want to come back to that one in a minute. Let's start with insensitivity. Maybe somebody made a careless joke at your expense, or there were thoughtless actions, or a lack of compassion towards you at a critical, painful moment in your life. Insensitivity. This could be something that we hold against other people. Oh, here's a good one. Broken trust. Maybe somebody shared some private information about you that wasn't supposed to get out. Or maybe somebody made a promise to you that they didn't keep. Broken trust. Overlooked. Nobody's ever felt overlooked here, right? Maybe you were left out of an important conversation. You were unrecognized at work, or you were neglected in a time of need. That's heavy. Oh, well, that kind of segues into our last one, just straight up good old neglect. Somebody who wasn't there for you, a friend or a family member who abandoned you at a critical time in need. That's not easy. I need some volunteers. I had talked to a couple of people. Come on up. Give them a round of applause. I got some hard work for them to do. Well, you want to come on over? And both of you can try this. I have to try to lift that, see how it feels.
You want me to go first?
You can do it, but
It's heavy.
is it heavy?
Yeah.
All right. What do you think, Eddie?
This is really heavy.
Can you do some curls with it? No. Oh, no, don't do that.
Don't do it.
What's our insurance policy here? Okay. Okay, now a simple question for you, a simple activity. I want you to remove those gray blocks without touching the red ones.
You can't. The red ones are on top. You can try.
Oh man, this is... All right, that's really nice, but you just ruined my analogy. You can sit down. Thank you. All right. This is when the kids outsmart the pastor day. There, okay, pretend like this is how it was supposed to go, okay? Well, this is not a perfect analogy, not just because the kids beat me. It's not a perfect analogy, but there is, I think, some value from a human perspective of what's going on here. In a way, from a human perspective, when we hold things against other people, we could say that it kind of, it blocks our access, our feelings, our ability to connect with God's forgiveness. I want to say it carefully because, again, it's a broken analogy. It doesn't work perfectly because in no way do we earn God's forgiveness. We don't go say, God, look, I forgave this person and this person. therefore you need to forgive me. As confusing as this can sound, that's not exactly what it is. It's a little different than that. And just as Jesus' expression comes with a twist, this comes with a twist as well. The things that we hold against other people, the debts that we hold against other people, they're maybe a little bit less like these red bricks, and they're a little bit more like this. Not that they are small, not that they're insignificant. They are significant. They do matter. But in comparison to the debt we have against God, it doesn't compare. It's like this. What Jesus is trying to teach us and what Jesus is trying to say is that there is great weight to the forgiveness that God offers us. And when we forgive other people, we pin that weight against it. It frees us. Because we understand, even though they're important, God's forgiveness is so much greater. When we release others, we grasp the weight of God's grace, and we ready our hearts to receive it. Now I know, and we're about ready to wrap up, but there's a few things that we need to qualify about this, because there are all sorts of difficult situations. There are all sorts of, yeah, but what about this? And if you're out there today and you're thinking, yeah, but what about this? I've been thinking about those too. Some qualifications. First, forgiveness, it does not always mean reconciliation. It does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes people use reconciliation as a guise to continue abuse or wrongdoing. So we have to be aware of that if we're going to be healthy. At the same time, it also doesn't mean that forgiveness never means reconciliation. There are different situations, and it requires prayerful meditation and counsel to be a guide, to determine which is which. Second, forgiveness is not once and done. It's not something that we simply often just put away. Sometimes, but not always. Think of it like a robe that you put on in the morning. Sometimes you just got to get one arm in at a time and you got to wear it. And the next morning you got to put that same robe on again. And you got to do it the next day. And you got to do it the next day until it essentially becomes a part of who you are. Forgiveness is not always once and done. Forgiveness is not letting things go or building this invisible armor of invulnerability either, which can actually have negative consequences. True forgiveness often feels the pain of what it's releasing. And lastly, and I want to lean into this one, forgiveness is not easy. Those little stones can feel like mountains. They can feel like mountains. But could it be different for you? Did you notice that there's really something absent from this prayer? Even though it's simple, there's something absent and very human. Jesus doesn't call his disciples to relent the fact that forgiveness is difficult or dwell on our human weaknesses, but he invites us instead to aspire to be genuinely forgiving people. In saying those words, as we also have forgiven our debts, we aspire to be something more than is natural. We declare with our words not what we hope for, but that we will be. This is something that we are doing. We capture the grace of God in praying that boldly. And so what we do is we transcend our very nature. These words don't have to be spoken in fear. They can be a declaration for us and a promise in the middle of an ask, knowing that God's grace is both to forgive us and enable us, both beyond our both beyond our comprehension, to know that his ability is also near. When I made my way down that mountain several years ago, to be honest, I was really nervous. I didn't want to have that conversation. I was thinking about the words over and over and over again, and how would that person respond? I also had a little bit of an ulterior motive. I wasn't going there just to ask for forgiveness. I was going there to forgive. Because that friend, a long time ago, neglected me and abandoned me at a critical moment. And it was not easy. When I sat down at that restaurant table in the middle of nowhere, I could still feel the wounds. But after I left, I was free.